Hey, how's it going? This is Greg with howtobuildgames.com. This lesson is part 3 in our Unity 2D series. It picks up where lesson 2 left off, which was you hit play, a spawner drops a snowman in this case, it falls in the bucket, it gives us a point. It's not very exciting in and of itself, but it's a really important foundation. Before I go further, I would be remiss if I didn't say, hey, go to howtobuildgames.com and sign up for the email list. That's how you get access to the source code and the art assets, things like that. You can shoot me an email if you have a question or comment. I'm probably not going to build your game for you, but anything outside of that, feel free to shoot me an email. So let's go ahead and get started. This lesson is going to be all about the spawner. We're going to take what we've got so far. We've got move, speed, and distance. We're going to get to those in a bit. Right now we've got one random game object, and that's one of our prefabs, which we've set up before. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take this, and instead of one object, we're going to set this up so it's one of 4 objects. Or at least we're going to set up this so that you've got the option of 4 objects to choose from. After we do that, we're going to make the spawner move back and forth, and then we're going to add a timer so that every so often it will, instead of dropping one object, at the end of the lesson you'll have a spawner that moves back and forth and chooses one of 4 random objects from the list over here and drops one every so often according to a timer. And we're going to have, that's where move, speed, and distance, and we'll have a timer set up over here as well. So you can kind of manipulate some of those objects. That makes things a little bit easier sometimes. Let's go ahead, and I'm actually going to take our spawn one object code. I'm going to go up to edit and duplicate, or you can do Control D or Command D on the Mac if you prefer keyboard shortcuts, and you should, by the way. Now it's going to give us an error because we've already got something called spawn one object, which we know. I'm going to click over here, or you can right click and choose rename, it doesn't matter, and call this spawn multiple objects. Now a little trick that I like to use is I'm going to hold down shift and hit home on the PC. The home key works very differently on the Mac, which is a massive source of frustration for me initially. So Mac users, you might have to just hold shift and use the back arrow. Now that it's selected over here, I'm going to hit Control C, and then I'm going to click over here. Now what that did, that renames this, but it also puts the name of this with the exact capitalization that I've used, which is very, very important, onto the clipboard. And so when I double click this and we go into this spawn multiple objects, which again we look at up here and we see, okay, that's the name of it. I'm going to click right there. I'm going to Control V. I double clicked to select the whole thing and Control V to paste. Now we've got the class name, which lines up with the file name, which is what you absolutely always have to have. So now if I went back to Unity, the error would go away. We're not going to do that right now because I'm going to stay zoomed in up here. Now the big thing that we do, we're going to change a couple of things. We're going to change this to be an array of objects, so it's not just one object but it holds several. And then we're going to change it over here where instead of picking and instantiating this one object, we do one of the series. So what I'm going to do is, maybe rather than calling this random game object, we're going to call it something like game object set. And the key thing here to do is I'm going to put brackets there. What that does is that says to initialize an array of type game object. Now if you're not familiar with arrays, that's okay. It's not that big of a deal. If we'd put a number in there like game object 3, that would mean 3 game objects. So we're leaving it blank because we're actually going to control that in the editor. And all it is basically just kind of a list, or if you can imagine, 3 boxes in this case, and each box has a game object in it. That's basically what we're going to do. So we're going to initialize an array of type game object with no particular number. But if we wanted a set number of items, because sometimes you do, it's alright if you don't quite fully understand that. It's going to make a lot of sense in just a minute. So with the game object array, and again, this is what makes it an array, and you always want to put that on the variable type, because that is the type of thing that we're making. We're going to refer to it by the variable name, game object set, although we're going to have some brackets over here down in the code when we access it. But it took me a while to remember, initially when I was learning these kinds of things years ago, where does the brackets go? Well, they go over here when you're initializing it, because you're saying I want to make an array of game objects. So anyway, I think that's enough of that. So what we're going to do now, we're going to change this line of code so that it will basically function the same initially. I'm going to double click that to highlight it, Control C to copy, and I'm going to say instantiate game object set. Now this will not work by itself because you've now made it an array over here, and so if you just do game object set, it doesn't know which one to do. So I'm going to say game object set 0. Now in real life we start counting at 1. Computers start at 0. So this is saying give me the first object, object 0, in the game object set array. So what does that look like? I'm going to go ahead and save this, Control S or Command S on the Mac, go back over to Unity. Now that's going to recompile. Our little error went away. Got a couple of things, it's just warnings. It says, hey, you assigned a value but it's never used. That's one of those helpful things. It just lets you know, more often than not, you know that it's not used because you have later plans for it in our case. So anyway, now I'm going to go over here to my spawner object, and instead of the spawn one object script, I'm going to click and drag spawn multiple objects and move that up there. Now because this script is derived from the last one, and there are other more proper object-oriented ways to do that, but this is easier for beginners to understand. Because this script has some of the same exact variables as the last one, like move speed and move distance, you'll notice that those didn't change at all. This changed. Game object set, it is a size of 0. Now, this gets a little confusing. That means it's actually a size of 0, as opposed to a minute ago where we said, object 0, which is actually the first object. What we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and put in 4, and so this is a size of 4, and that's a human number, so it's 0 actually means 0, and then you got 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you've got elements 0, 1, 2, and 3, and so that's where the code makes sense. We're asking for element 0. Now all 4 of these say, game object and none. Well, we're going to start populating that. So we're going to go to our prefabs, and we'll just take them and drag the first one in. So we got a Halloween bat, we got our cat, we got our snowman. Now for this last one, this is kind of cool. This little button over here, when I click that, because it knows that it's looking for a game object, it's going to give me a list of the game objects in the game. This can be really, really useful, especially when you get a crowded scene and you're just looking for, a certain asset that's audio or something like that. So we've already got the bat, the cat, the snowman, so we need the turkey. And so I'm going to double click him, and there you go. So that's a couple of different ways you can populate that. I'm going to save my scene. I'm going to save it as something different than we did last time. That's why I did save as. And so I'm going to call this Part 3, Lesson 2D. So now when we hit play, it's going to give us the first object. Make sure you've got spawn multiple objects selected here. Change your size to 4, do all that. So if you've still got the old one, then you're just going to have one item slot. You're not going to have this drop down array option. So if you've done all that, then when we hit play, we should get the Halloween bat. Bingo, there's our bat, there's our point. Now if you want to change that, so let's say we want the turkey with the black hat. Element 3 is the key. Again, computer terms, 0, 1, 2, 3. So we know we want element 3, so I'm going to double click on that and move over here. So instead of object 0, we want object 3. I'm going to save it, move back over here. Now we should get the turkey with the black hat. And we do. And this is good. The reason this is good is because now we can spawn whichever of those that we want to. And so, double click back here to get back to our script. So the next step is going to be doing one of them randomly, so that every time we hit play, it pulls a random game object. Now, Unity makes it easy in a lot of neat ways. We're going to do one of those when we get to moving the spawner. Pulling a random object is something else that they do very nicely and just makes it really kind of easy. So watch this. We're going to make an integer and call it which item. And the way we're going to grab a random number is we're going to do random dot range. And look at this. You do a float, minimum, maximum, or if I use the right and left arrows, you can do an integer, minimum, maximum. What this is this is what's called an overloaded class, and basically it does the same thing, but it does it with a float or an integer. Now, if you just pick random range, and I hit tab just to finish that out, and I just type in what I want, it's going to understand that, and it will automatically pick the right one. And so it knows we want to use the integer version of this class because we just put in integers. And so you remember over here we did 0 to get the first one and 3 to get the last one. So now what we're going to do instead is we're going to do which item. Let me hit escape to move out of that. And so now instead of us putting in the number 0, 1, 2, or 3, we're going to get a random number, and we can even do a debug log to say our random number is which item, and save that out. And so we're going to get a random number between 0 and 3. It's going to tell us what number that is. Then it's going to spawn that object. And so those numbers will correlate to these objects. So let's go ahead and click over here. Unity recompiles. And when we hit play, we're going to get a random object. So hey, there's a snowman, object number 2. Let's click the spawner so we can see. Element 2, yep. And again, we get a cat head because our random number is 1, so it's pulling random object 1. And you can sit here and do this, all day, and just to test it, and hit play a bunch and make sure that it is actually doing everything. So there's all the objects. We haven't gotten the turkey yet, but it does work. I promise. So now we've got multiple objects. This is a good thing, right? But it still just drops 1, which is okay. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to make the spawner move. What we're going to do is basically we're going to be manipulating the X of the spawner. And so like if you click right on that X, you can drag it back and forth. That's basically what we're going to be simulating. So we're going from -10 to +10. somewhere in there. Yeah, it looks about right. And I'm just kind of moving it around with my mouse. I'm still holding down, having clicked on this X. And so you can do that all day long. I know that I want it to start at 0, so I'm going to go back and leave it at that. So we're going to go ahead and click on our script to go back in there, and I'm going to show you basically how to get some movement on the spawner object, and then, you know, in kind of a bad way, how not to do it, but the easy way that'll help you understand the slightly more complex, way better method that we're going to use. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a new private float and call it new X position, I guess. And again, because they're private, they're not showing up over in the inspector, because move speed and move distance and game object set are public. They are going to show up in the inspector so that we can manipulate those. For now though, what's important is we're going to take new X pause. We're going to move down here to update. It's called once per frame. And so we're going to actually, let me initialize this to 0, because that is a good practice to follow, that you always want to have things initialized before you start using them. Give them an initial value. And so we're going to say new X pause plus plus, which again will add 1 to it each time. And since this is called once per frame, that's going to grow pretty quickly. But that's okay for now. You don't ever really want to do what we're going to do in a real game, but I'm just doing it so that you understand how to move things first, because that's important. So transform position equals new vector 3, and we're going to do new X pause, and then start position Y and start position Z. So what that's going to do, because I don't have another game object specified out here, this is going to move the transform position of the current game object, our spawner, to a new position that has this value in the X. Remember, that X is the horizontal axis in this case. That's the way we want to move it. But then it's going to take its Y and Z values from the initial start position, which is Y. We set it up here. So as soon as the script starts, and this only runs once, start position is set to current transform position. For the Y and Z value, those are going to stay just where they are when this script starts, and the X position is going to come from here, and it's just going to go up. It's going to start at 0, and it's going to go up. Actually, you know what? Let's start it at -10, because we determined, oh yeah, that's a good starting place. Alright, so I've hit Control S to save. Our script is done. I'm going to click over here, let it recompile, and so you can just go ahead and move it to -10, because that's where we start. And when I hit play, I'm going to zoom out a little bit, use my mouse wheel and Alt middle mouse click, or you can use the buttons up here to pan around my scene. What's going to happen is the spawner is going to start, it's going to drop an object, and it's just going to keep moving this way. So we do that, and there it goes, and it's off, and it's gone. So even if we start this at 0, we hit play, it's still going to jump over there to start, because we told it to start at -10. And as you see, that number just keeps going up and keeps going up. And if you let that run for very long, or for long enough, it would probably crash. Now the X and the Z are going to be the same, so if we move it up some, then it's going to function from where we moved it up. For the sake of consistency, I'll just hit 20 and leave that in there, but again, it's going to stay right there and be right where we want it to be. So this is good. And again, not quite that exciting, and you never ever really want to do that in a production thing, but it's important that you understand, oh, this is how you move it. So let's go back into the script. Now this is a little more complicated. You have to make sure that you're saying, hey, this is a new vector 3, because it's not one that's been made before. Don't forget that. You're saying transform position of the current object, and basically you're assigning this new XYZ coordinate to be the position of the current object. So now that we've done that, which is not really a good way to do it, what we're going to do instead is say new X position equals, and again, this is where Unity helps us out a lot. MathF is a class full of cool stuff, you know, for when you need math. All sorts of different kinds of things, rounding up to an integer, smooth step, sine, cosine, approximately. MathF approximately is used if you're trying to compare floating point values, because it's very hard to get exact when you're doing things like that. So basically the guys at Unity have taken a lot of the stuff that people would use and put it into this just to kind of make it easier. So in this case we're going to use one called ping pong. And so you got float t, which is the time, and float length, which is the length. Now for the time you can use our move speed variable and move distance variable, and that's going to work okay. So let's go ahead and see what that does. And again, this is just manipulating the X, just like we had a minute ago. Let's see what that does. And it doesn't do much like what we thought it was going to. It moves it. Yeah. Now, doing this in and of itself won't help us much at all. The key thing here, and if you go to the Google and look up mathf.pingpong, get the Unity script reference, you're going to see this. And this is basically the same thing that we've done. Now, why does this look a little different? Because it's in JavaScript. So we want to change that to be in C#. Now you're going to see transform position equals new vector 3, blah, blah, blah. The key here is time.time. So return value will move back and forth between 0 and length. And it ping-pongs the value t, so it's never larger than the length, never smaller than 0. So it's basically going to move it back and forth. You know what? Let's just take this piece of code, right-click, copy, and for now we're going to comment out our two things and start with that. So it's going to ping-pong it. You remember we had the time and the length. So saved over here, we hit play, and there you go. And it's moving very slowly between 0 and 3. And that's not bad. That's a good start. It's important to understand the underlying concepts, and that's why I go into the depth that I do. Now what we can do with this, so instead of time.time, the way we can start manipulating this is if we factor in our move speed. And so time.time times move speed, and we save that and we go back over here and hit play. Now move speed is 1, and so you know anything times 1 is itself, and so that's not going to change much. But this is the cool part. If we start changing move speed a little bit, then we can manipulate things a little more. And so if we crank that up, then it's moving really fast, or you know, as fast or slow as we want it to be. So we can even slow it down, you know, to be even slower than it was before, or we can do it at 10 and make it even faster than it was before. So this is getting us really close to where we want to be. So what we're going to do, we're going to basically, we're taking this and I'm going to Control X or Command X on the Mac, uncomment this line and paste that in there. mathf.pingpong is this and this, but instead of 3 we actually just want to focus on move distance, and put my semicolon there, and now we're going to say new X position is here. So instead of putting everything all in one line here like the Unity example did, which is fine to do, we're going to assign the value to the variable here into the variable new X position and then assign that there. And that just makes the code a little bit cleaner. And if you'll notice, well, their line is basically identical to our line now, except they've got transform position Y and Z, which is using the current transform position rather than where we start. And that would be good if we were going to be changing the Y and Z, but in this case we're not. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So now we've got this, which is going to move it back and forth. Control S to save, back over here, let it recompile, and now we've got it moving. We can crank up the move speed, we can crank up the move distance, and so now it's moving between 0 and 4. And so we crank that up. Oh, now it's moving between 0 and 8.37. And so you get the idea. So 0 and 20 even. And so we're really close to what we want, but not quite, because we're starting here and going over there. So what we want to do, instead of 0 to 20, for example, and we'll go ahead and set the move speed to 10 and the move distance to 20. So it's moving from 0 to 20. That's not quite what we want. What we want it actually doing is moving from -10 to +10. So that distance, what we want to do is basically, once we take the value, and so this value ends up being somewhere between 0 and 20, we're going to subtract move distance divided by 2, float. What this says is if move distance is 20, what we end up with is 20 divided by 2, which is 10. So now we're moving from -10 to +10. We're still moving a distance of 20, but by adding that in, we're now, instead of going from here to there, we're going from here to here. So, and this might be easier to show. If you sit down and do a couple of examples, it ends up being fairly obvious. It's not that complicated. This is one of those things you can plug it in. It's better if you understand why that this is moving half the distance back. That would be different if we weren't at 0, 0. You know, we could always move our bucket to 10 and then just move from 0 to 20. That would work too. But I think this is kind of a clean solution. Because then, well, what if we wanted to move our distance to 20? You know, or 30 or 40, and then we've got to keep moving the bucket over. That's not really what we want. So let's go back over here. What it's going to do, it's going to move back and forth over our spot. So there you go. It moves, it moves. Now you might notice that it drops a snowman from the middle still, even though it starts over here. If you hit pause before you hit play, you remember in the startup, we spawn one at the object's current location. So that piece of code functions before the one that moves the spawner over here. That's why. Alright, so the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a timer to this so that every X amount of seconds it's going to drop a new random object. So we're close. This lesson's going to go a little bit longer than the 30-minute mark that I've been trying to hit, but I really want to add this in there. I think this is a key part that ties the rest of this lesson so far together, because if you move back and forth and you choose one of 4 random objects but you're not actually spawning any of them, well, that's not very exciting in and of itself. So now we're going to go ahead, I'm going to click back in here, and so we're going to do a couple more things now to set us up so that we're in really good shape to finish this part of the lesson. I'm going to make a public float called time left until spawn and set that at 0. I'm going to make a public float called start time and make that 0. And now I'm going to make a public float called seconds between spawn and set that to something like 3. That's a float so that we have a little more flexibility rather than just an integer, because that might not be specific enough for what we want. Having added those, now we're going to go back down here to the update function, and I'm going to paste some code in that I typed up and made sure it worked. Basically what we're going to do, time left until spawn is going to be time minus start time. That's just going to count down the current amount of time until spawn, which is what this function gives us. If the time left is greater than or equal to whatever we've set as how many seconds, then we want to reset the start time to be time.time, which is the current time. Time left until spawn is 0, and we put a little debug log that says, hey, spawn 1 here. So I'm going to hit Control S to save, go back over here, going to clear it, going to run it, and then you'll see counting down over here, and any moment, hey, spawn 1 here. So it's counting up over here, time left until spawn, start time. And start time is kind of irrelevant for us. We're not actually going to be manipulating that, but in this we're not going to manipulate, but I just put it there so you can kind of see how it runs. And you see seconds until spawn. Now if we crank that down some, and we put that to be, I don't know, every couple of seconds, and we clear it, then every 2.5 seconds, we should be seeing a new one. Yes, there we go. That'll break it good. So now every 0.39 of a second, it is spawning one, and you can get yourself into a lot of trouble if you crank this down too low and freeze up Unity and stuff. So be careful with the slider. It might be better to put in numbers and things like that. So now we're back to 5 seconds every spawn. Wait for that. 1 second every spawn. So, and this thing is just moving back and forth, and you'd be spawning one here, spawning one here, spawning one here. Let's go ahead and do that, and then we're going to end the lesson. So to double click, spawn multiple objects, go back into our code, and okay, the reason that seconds between spawn here didn't change over there, this says 3 and that says 5, is because I originally did it at 5, and once you've initialized it, it's going to stay that way. So I'm going to change that to 3 just to match up with what we've got here. So what we're going to do, we're going to go in and grab pretty much all of this code, Control X on the PC, Command X on the Mac. We're going to make a new function, which we start with void and call it spawn random object. Open bracket, close bracket. That's the way you got to start and end all of your functions. I'm going to Control V or Command V to paste everything back in there. And so now we've taken all that out of start. The only thing we want to do is start and set the position. In spawn random object, we are going to pick a random object, tell us what it is, spawn it or instantiate it in our case, and set the position of it to the current object's current position. Now, we take spawn random object. I'm going to hit Control C to copy the name of that. And instead of saying, hey, spawn one here, we're going to say spawn a random object. So now, instead of printing a debug statement, it should actually drop one. Go over here, let it recompile, clear that out, and hit play. Now when we get to the timer, it spawns an object. And let's see, hey, it spawns an object. So it is now spawning random objects, and we can change the speed if we want it to move faster. We can crank down the seconds between spawns so that it spawns one every 2 seconds or every 1 second. If you want to get really crazy with this, yes, you can do, 0.1, although I don't recommend it, as you see everything struggling to keep up. So we'll stick with 1 in this case. Now, everything is slowing down a lot, and that is because all those objects that are missing the bucket, if we move over here and we set seconds to spawn 1, the ones that miss the bucket just keep falling, which is bad. And as you zoom out, you can see all these different things falling. We're going to handle that in the next lesson. So in a similar way to when we catch things in here and destroy them and add a point, we want to have something that catches them down here, destroys them, but does not add a point. And you can even have a, how many you caught, how many you missed if you want to do that. If you want to try that between now and the next lesson, that's great. The best way to learn this kind of stuff is to just get in there and do it, I think. That's why I'm teaching this whole series. So, anyway, that's it for today. Go to howtobuildgames.com. You can get the source code for this and all the other lessons when you sign up for the email list. You get my email address. I hope you've learned something today. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson. And I know I'm having a good time making it. Everybody has given me some great feedback. And in the next lesson, we're going to add the player movement so we can actually move the bucket and try to catch some of these things. We're going to be tracking the score. We're going to be destroying the old objects. And we're going to have the score on the screen in our game view up here, like I showed you at the beginning of the last lesson. So stick with us. The lesson after that will be taking this very ugly game and actually making it look kind of nice. And that'll probably be the end of the series. Be a nice 5-part chunk of lessons. And we should be in good shape. I'm going to go ahead and save my scene again, as you want to do fairly often. And on that note, I'm out of here. So it's Greg with howtobuildgames.com. Thanks for watching. Make sure that you subscribe to us on YouTube and leave a comment and like the video if you liked it. Thanks. Have a good one.